Hello, my name is Medrick Rodriguez, and this is a message from Med. We are going to begin a study on the books of Samuel, in which we will look at each chapter. We will break down the meaning of the text and its context and see how it can be applied today. Samuel was a great leader of the people of Israel and helped transition the nation of Israel to become a monarchy. After the people of Israel were freed from slavery in Egypt, they crossed the wilderness and entered the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. When they entered the promised land, they had to conquer the people there so that each of the 12 tribes could have their part of the land. At the end of this part of the story, Joshua famously said, "If serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Though the people of Israel said that they would serve the Lord faithfully, they would not keep that promise. After Joshua's death, Israel entered a period of time in which they were ruled by judges, a period characterized by upswings and downswings. When the people of Israel were not faithful to God, they would fall into captivity at the hands of other nations there. God would raise up a judge to help them rise out of captivity. The people of Israel would remain faithful to God until the death of that particular judge, but then they would start the process over again. Generally, the 400-year period of the judges was marked by this radical individualism. They rejected the standard of God's word and accepted the individual standard of what was right in their own eyes. This is the backdrop to the story of Samuel. I hope you enjoy this journey through the book of Samuel. I will read a few verses and give an explanation and context. At the end of the chapter, I will state lessons we can learn from the text. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So we start this story learning about this man named Elkanah. So one thing that's important to remember is that God is always going to use us to complete his will. Okay, so he can use angels, he can do things himself, but he would rather use us because he wants us to serve him willfully. Another thing we learn is that Elkanah, even though he lived in the hill country of Ephraim, he was actually a descendant of Levi. And the Levites were those who were supposed to serve God or were dedicated to serve God. We also see that Elkanah had two wives. This doesn't mean that it was necessarily sanctioned by God, but it was something that happened. And though it may seem like it was normal, it was something that was problematic, which we'll see later on. Now, this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day where Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. So the first people named here are the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, which you'll see more later, but they're very important to Samuel's story as well. We also see that every year Elkanah took his family to worship God at Shiloh, which was a designated area to offer the sacrifices. And we see here that Elkanah not only goes himself, but he takes his entire family with him. Okay? And we'll learn later that Ophni and Phinehas were corrupt, but we see that this did not affect Elkanah. He still went faithfully to serve the Lord regardless of the corruption around him. Okay? However, although Elkanah didn't let the corruption affect him personally, The rivalry between Penina and Hannah was causing problems because Hannah couldn't have children, and as a result, Penina would bully her, so to speak, and it caused grief for Hannah. It looks like to compensate, Elkanah would give Hannah a double portion, but this wasn't necessarily cutting it because Hannah wanted children, not a double portion of a sacrifice. And we see here that just as we all know, good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Hannah was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. So we see here that Elkanah is trying to comfort his wife. He says, am I not better than 10 sons? And he was trying to comfort her, but we see here that he is not fully understanding her plight. And something that us men suffer from is insensitivity. Then the family eats, and Hannah goes to pray. So we see one good thing here, that Hannah, she's struggling, she's suffering, but she knows that she has to go and take her problems to the Lord. And she was praying quietly and to herself and telling the Lord, pouring out her heart, saying that if he would give her a son, she would dedicate him to serve God and that no razor shall touch his head. What that means is that he would become a Nazarite from birth, and that was a special servant of God. And this type of person would have certain restrictions on his or her behavior. So, first of all, Samuel or her future son would be abstinent from any product of the grapevine, which symbolizes that he would be distant from any fleshly pleasures. Also, he would not take part in any mourning of the dead, symbolizing that he would not worry about the earthly pains, the earthly pleasures, but focus on serving God. Also, he would not cut his hair, and this was kind of to show everybody that this person was a specific Nazarite servant of the Lord. Typically, this sort of vow was done for a month or so, sort of like Lent, as some people do. But in this particular case, Hannah vowed that he would be a Nazarite from birth. And another example of this type of commitment is Samson. Typically, Levites would serve God from ages 30 years to 50 years. So Samuel was already going to serve God from years 30 to year 50. But we see here that how God is working through Hannah, because she's barren, and she prays and pleads God to give her a son. And then if he were to give her a son, she would dedicate him from birth. So we see here how even though this bad thing has happened to Hannah, we see how God is making it work for good. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman, and Eli said to her, How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. Eli observes Hannah that it looks like she's praying, but we don't see anything going on as far as hearing what she's saying. So he thinks she is drunk. And this is kind of foreboding because later we're going to find out the condition of the worship in this period of time. So it looks like having drunk people around the temple or around the tabernacle was something that was normal. But Hannah answered, No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So we see here the proper response that when we have troubles and bitterness, we have to pour it out before the Lord. And as a result, we see here at the end that her face was no longer sad. She had regained the joy of the Lord. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. So we see that Hannah is able to worship God. She has faith in him, even though when they leave Ramah, she is not yet pregnant, but she has faith that God has listened to her, and therefore she has the joy of the Lord again. So they return home. She continues to be faithful to God, and God is faithful to her, because it says the Lord remembered her, and she bore a son and named him Samuel. The name Samuel means name of God, but Hannah, as was common among the Hebrews, she made a pun of the name because the word Samuel in Hebrew sounds like the word asked. So she says, I name you Samuel because I asked the Lord for you, and that's why your name is going to be Samuel. She is a great example of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises of God. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, As soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best for you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So when the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. If you remember, Elkanah took his family every year to go worship in Shiloh. However, this year, Hannah had just given birth to her son Samuel, and she said she would not go until the child was weaned. In that culture, usually the child was not weaned until 2 years, sometimes 3 years of age. So she would wait until that time passed uh, to take him to the temple, because she knew that whenever he would go, he would stay there. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. So we get to the point where Samuel is weaned, and Hannah is ready to dedicate him to God's service for all the days of his life. So you can imagine the bittersweet moment, because God had given Hannah a son, but now she's going to return him to God. But they were obedient to their promise. And we see here at the end that they are continuing to worship God. So regardless of the situation, we learn that it is important to bring our worship to God, and we will see that he will make everything work for good. Although it may seem like we struggle aimlessly through life, God orders our steps, holding our hand every step of the way. We may not understand why certain things happen, but we can be assured that God is in control. Although Hannah's life alongside Peninnah was not pleasant, God made it that way so that she could offer the fateful promise that would result in Samuel, one of the most influential people in the history of Israel. One lesson we can learn from Elkanah is that we are responsible for the spiritual well-being of our family. He faithfully traveled with his family and led them in worship. Similarly, we must not only seek God regularly, but lead our family in worship through daily family devotionals. Some lessons we can learn from Hannah include continually seeking God through prayer. Hannah knew that only God could help her, so she sought Him earnestly through prayer. In addition, Hannah was a woman of faith. Even though she did not immediately become pregnant, she worshiped God because she understood that God had listened to her prayer and would answer according to His will. Finally, she was faithful to her word. We need to be careful when we're making promises to God. He is always faithful, so we cannot run the risk of making a promise we cannot fulfill. In conclusion, the title of this lesson is called "The Prayer of a Righteous Person Has Great Power," which is something that James tells the church in his letter, written in the New Testament. If we are continually and faithfully serving God alongside our family, we will have the confidence to come to God during our tribulations in order to reach mercy and grace through Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.